Now I'm honored to introduce Jules, a president and CEO of Oregon Beverage Recycling Cooperative, who runs BottleDrop program in Oregon. Jules, please take away.
All right, well, thank you so much. What a really great and exciting conference. There's been some fantastic presentations here, and I'm really excited about the concept of reuse. I'm Jules Bailey. I'm the president and CEO of Oregon Beverage Recycling Cooperative. I'm going to share my presentation here. Hopefully everybody can see that okay. So Oregon Beverage Recycling Cooperative, we are a not-for-profit cooperative composed of the beverage industry, and we handle the entire deposit return system in the state of Oregon. So a deposit return system, we have a system where you pay a 10-cent deposit on most beverage containers. We cover about 88% of the beverage container market in Oregon. And then when you return those containers, you then get your 10 cents back, and then we take those containers and we recycle them to their highest and best use. And all of our material gets processed domestically. So the aluminum gets turned into new cans and can sheet mills in the Midwest. The glass gets turned into new bottles in Portland, Oregon. And the plastic goes to St. Helens, Oregon, and turned into the raw material that can become new plastic bottles as well. So we do primarily recycling infrastructure. Our slides to advance. So our vision for OBRC is a world where no resource is wasted. And our mission is to ensure that no resource goes to waste by empowering people to redeem every container easily, effectively, efficiently, and effectively. And so our vision really is a world where we treat the things that we put out into the marketplace as a resource. And then we ensure that those resources aren't wasted. And as we started thinking about how to achieve that vision, obviously reuse comes to top of mind. And as we process the nearly 2 billion, actually over 2 billion containers that we process every year at OBRC, we thought, well, why are we crushing all of these glass bottles? Can't we take some of them and reuse them? And so we decided to embark on our reuse program. The Oregon bottle deposit system has been around since 1971. It was originally at 5 cents. It then existed in various forms until 2009 when OBRC was created. 2011, we introduced redemption centers. We started planning for our reusable bottle program in 2016. Then the deposit went up to 10 cents in 2017. And then we launched our reusable bottle program statewide in 2018. And we're currently the only state that has a fully statewide reusable bottle program. But in order to have a reuse program that is successful, obviously you have to get the bottles back. And that really is the key underpinning any reuse program, is you have to be able to get the reusable container back. So really that comes down to the value of the deposit. And what we found was that people value money, unsurprisingly. And in 2017, when the redemption value increased from a nickel to a dime, we saw a 35% increase overnight in the percentage of the containers returned. 35 percentage points. So we went from 64% all the way up to now we're actually around 90% redemption. In the last published report for last year, we were at over 88% redeemed. Right now, if you took a slice in time for OBRC today, we'd be over 90% redeemed. So basically 9 out of 10 containers sold in the marketplace come back. And that's really important when we are trying to reuse those containers. And in fact, we take the glass containers that we recycle, and that cullet is actually sent to the plant that then makes the reusable containers. So the reusable bottles are actually made, designed by us, and then made out of the recycled glass that comes back from the one-way bottles right here in Portland. So how do the containers come back? You've got the deposit, and a good system combines both the financial incentive and then the convenience incentive, right? And you have to have both. You have to have both the financial incentive and then a convenient ability to return those containers. So we have what we call express or dealer redemption centers that use a very convenient bag drop program throughout the state. You basically get an account, you get these bags that you throw all your containers into, you drop the bags off at a number of different stores or redemption centers. We have 100 drop locations and counting around the state. And we continue to add these drop locations. And then we do the work of pulling the containers out and separating them from those bags and getting them back into queue for washing. We also have these in rural areas. So this is a rural Oregon drop site. You can see it's solar powered. It's essentially just a modified shipping container. And these are pretty easy to deploy and put around the state. They're fairly low cost, and they just go into a parking lot or into some other use, and they're very low impact, and customers can just walk up and drop their bags full of material in there. You can see the network that we have around the state of our redemption centers, our bag drop doors. The redemption centers also count as bag drop doors, so that's how we get to that overall number. This graphic's a little bit old. We've added a few since we made this graphic. And then we transport everything back to one of 5 different processing plants around the state to centralize all of our production facility. So we run all the trucks, we do all the machines, we do all the deposit reconciliation, we contract for the washing. We do basically every portion of the wash, although right now we are contracting for the wash as opposed to washing it ourselves. And as we build volume, we plan to wash it ourselves. So you can see that one of the reasons that this works so well is this change over time in Oregon. So we flash back 13 years ago, and most of the containers that were being returned, and about 1 billion containers a year were returned to large format retail stores or to convenience stores. And it was very difficult because retailers did not want to take back bottles that were whole. They wanted them crushed. They wanted to save space. And actually, interestingly enough, OBRC was one of the last entities to process refillable bottles back in the day when most glass bottles used to be refillable. And in fact, we still have people working here at OBRC that remember how we used to collect and process refillable bottles. And so we tapped into some of that institutional knowledge. But it was really about the mid-90s where some of the big chains, grocery store chains, said, we're not going to take any more back, and we won't sell them if they're stocked on our shelf. And so refillable bottles really went away. And not only that, but the small regional beverage distributors, both soda and beer, that had the capacity to wash those bottles also went away. And you got sort of this bifurcated model where you have very small local craft producers, or you have sort of big national producers, and not a lot in between that has the volume and the capacity. You don't have your big sized Olympias or Rainiers or Henry Weinhardts that have enough volume to be able to then support your return infrastructure. And also your consumer model has changed because you don't have a consumer going to the store and buying just a case of their one beer that they like, right? Most consumers tend to mix and match different beverage types and want to be able to return them together. So refillables really kind of disappeared at the end of the 20th century in the United States. But then over time, as we've brought our BottleDrop network back with direct return to our network, we have been able to then centralize all the returns through our system, in addition to increasing the returns to over 2 billion returned, and be able to take those bottles directly out of the stream ourselves to get them back into a wash infrastructure. So now you don't have to return a Henry Weinhardt's bottle to Henry Weinhardt's or an Olympia bottle to Olympia. And if they go back to the store doesn't have to worry about it because it's coming through the green bag program, or it's going directly back to one of our centers. And that's allowed us to re-centralize all of the logistics. So we decided to launch this reusable program. Right now, we have 12 participating breweries, cideries, and wineries. We actually have wineries in these amber bottles. They really like the refillable aspect of it. And it's pretty simple. I mean, we can walk into a producer and say, hey, we're going to offer you a refillable product that is going to give you differentiation on the shelf. It's going to tell a great sustainability story for your company. Oh, and by the way, we can meet or beat by 10% your packaging costs. And it's really hard for them to say no. So we have about 2.5 million units in circulation currently. We have a 500 ml package and a 12-ounce package available. I'll show you a quick little video of how we market it.
I'm feeling good. I'm feeling good. Can't get you
lots of fun there. And obviously the wash process is a little more complicated than that. But really the US has a lot of catching up to do. Lots of other countries use refillable bottles. So we've been learning from that experience. But right now the United States essentially sits at 0%. This is the washer that we've historically used. It's a pretty simple German-made Seitz washer. This one's actually located in Missoula, Montana, but it's a kind of one that we would set up in the Pacific Northwest, maybe a slightly bigger model. You can compare that to, this is how new one-way glass bottles are. You can see all that heat going into making those glass bottles and compare that to this. You can see, I'll talk to you about what that flashing machine was in just a second, but the carbon savings is really incredible. In fact, one Owens, Illinois life cycle assessment indicated that there is essentially a 96% carbon savings for refillable bottles over even recycled one-way bottles. So what makes a refillable program work? You essentially need to have the economics work. So you have to have an efficient collection and centralization system for the bottles. And that's really built on a successful deposit return system because you have to be able to get the bottles back. There's standardization of bottle types, really reduces the sorting. You don't want to have to figure out every individual producer's bottle and get it back to them specifically. So we offer an industry standard bottle where the labels can get washed off and then it's returned to anybody. And then really it's built on, as we say, the number of turns and the number that are sold. So the number of uses that a bottle gets actually increases the economic value. These bottles are more expensive up front, but the more times that you use them, the cheaper the bottles get. And that's really how we lower costs for all participants, is everybody is financially incented to get as many uses out of that bottle as possible. And then obviously the more volume, the more that we can then spread capital costs over the entire system. And then centralizing the washer and the distributor, you essentially allow for that bottle to become a capital asset rather than an OpEx expenditure. You're treating it as a capital expenditure that then you're optimizing over time. But the real key is that you need to be able to have cross-border integration, get the bottles back, and to have the volume. And so one of the things that we say is reuse at scale requires a deposit return system. But reuse at scale also requires that the deposit return system work very well. And that's, I think, a really important point, is that once you have a reuse system, all parties are incredibly incented to maintain a really, really high redemption rate for your deposit return system and a high quality material separated return system, because you absolutely have to get those bottles back. If you lose one of those bottles, it's like losing a little nugget of gold. In addition to the environmental waste, the economics and the environment really align. So right now, our bottles are only getting about 2 to 3 uses per bottle, but they're designed to go up to 25 or more. And that's really because we lose so many bottles. So if you think about it, essentially to get 5 uses of the bottle, you need to get 80% of them back into circulation. To get 10 units of the uses of the bottle, you need to get 90% of them back into circulation, and so on from there. But the problem is right off the top, we lose about 25% of the bottles to out-of-state distribution that we can never get back. And so they essentially become a one-way bottle when they leave the state. And that's primarily actually from Oregon to Washington. We lose a lot of those bottles. So if you actually had a system where you could trade back and forth across the border, you could then get much better environmental outcomes because you'd get non-linear, a geometric increase in the number of turns that you could get from those bottles. We don't have a crating system in the US beverage distribution system like they do in Europe, but that would also improve the experience, but that would require a big national change to our crating systems and how we do distribution. And then label standards are really, really important. You have to have labels that wash off, and it's incredibly difficult to get labels that have exactly the right chemistry. When you're operating at a smaller scale, most of the really washable labels require a huge scale of purchase to be able to use them. So the bigger your program, the better your labels are going to be. Then we also work with our producers to put education and co-marketing onto the packaging so consumers understand it. And then really to build trust with our producers, quality is everything. You saw this machine in use at the wash facility briefly there. We do a ton of testing of these bottles to make sure that they're absolutely clean and pristine. We can get all the contaminants out, any cracks are addressed, and this can see down to less than the width of a human hair, any imperfection. It also uses some infrared and some X-ray technology as well too. So really high detail there. These are some of the producers that we have in the program. If you buy a Pacific Northwest beer and you have access to buy any of them, please do. You'll see the fun bottle. It says refillable, please return, embossed on it. And then please, bring it back to Oregon to return it so we don't lose it in the system. So the biggest challenges to growth, and just to bring it to a close here, border issues are a huge issue. Cans, movement from glass to cans is really a big headwind, a lot of shift in packaging to cans and away from glass. There's a lot of opportunity in wine. Wine is not in the Oregon bottle bill yet, but it may be so in a few years. Wine bottles would create a lot of value to be able to wash those, but they also tend to leave the state a lot more. So there's a benefit and a challenge there. And then of course, really need to have as much volume as possible in order to justify things like a big wash facility that then makes all the efficiencies even more tangible. And then again, don't underestimate the challenge of labels. So that's it. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Jules. Please raise your hand to ask a question. Heather, please go ahead.
Jules, awesome presentation as usual. Of course, we would love to have this in Washington State. So my question is that right now you have, I think you said like around 12 beer companies involved. The ones that haven't gotten involved, what is their barriers? Why are they holding back at the moment?
Yeah, great question. So if you're in glass and you're in Oregon and you meet our 25% maximum out-of-state distribution requirement, you're in our bottles. We basically captured that market. So if they're not in the program, it either means that A, they're not in glass, or B, and this is really the challenge, is they have higher distribution out of state. So the feedback loop is like, if we could go into some of those larger SKUs and larger companies that are exporting a lot, like say a 10 barrel or Breakside or some of those, then not only would that increase the number of bottles that we could get back, but it would also immediately create a huge volume pop that then would allow for a lot more capital investment, like bigger wash facilities and other things. So you get sort of a whole that's greater than the sum of its parts. So we're kind of doing as best as we can just within our own borders, but that's primarily the barrier to expansion.
Thank you so much, Jules. Erin, you have a question.
Yeah, hi. Was a great presentation. I'm curious how, if you provide support, I saw this at maybe your second to the last slide, marketing support for businesses. So you said early, it's a great sustainability story. And then I saw the fantastic video that encourages businesses to be part of it, but then business to consumer, how are you helping with that, and how are they utilizing that campaign? And can you say anything about whether there's success with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So our individual participants do most of the direct to consumer marketing. We're not as good at that, but they do great work. And I wanted to show it today, but I just wanted to be careful with the time. If you go into YouTube and look up a Double Mountain and refillable, you can see a video that Double Mountain Brewery produced about the refillable bottle program, and it's remarkable. It's a really great video. So our producers that use it really market it heavily to their customers. And then what we do is we actually pay for, like on their 6-pack, we buy a quarter of their 6-pack carrier cost to be able to put a bunch of information on the side of it that says, here's the details of the program, here's how you return it, all of that. Mm-hmm. But the other part of it, you didn't ask this question, but I'm going to answer it anyway. The other part of it is that we tried really hard to make this as seamless an experience as possible, so that if the consumer knows about it, great, they can get excited and they can look for those bottles on the shelf. But if they don't know about it and they just happen to buy that 6-pack anyway, they don't have to do anything different or special with their bottles. They just return it the way that they've always returned it, and then we'll fish it out of the stream to make sure that we aren't relying on the customer having to really understand the program in order to make it work.
Right, gotcha. Can I ask a quick follow-up?
Yeah.
Actually, it's not really a follow-up, but this is another question. Do y'all work with restaurants as much as you do cideries and whatnot? Yeah.
Yeah, so we collect all the bottles back from bars and taverns too. It's a little bit of a different mechanism, but they all end up with us anyway. So thankfully, none of that glass is lost to us. We get all that back through our system too.
Awesome, wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jules. McKenna, only if you have a very quick question.
Yeah, I guess, well, I was going to ask about restaurants, but somebody in the chat also had a question about growlers. I'm wondering, is there a role for growlers in a reusable deposit system? And can that go beyond beer to things like kombucha or other locally produced beverages?
Yeah, and there's nothing that's a great question. There's nothing that limits us to beer. And in fact, we have beer, cider, and wine. And we've been talking to a couple kombucha producers about going into our bottles. This isn't an industry or beverage type specific. It's just that's who's been interested in the amber glass so far. But growlers are great. We love growlers. The only challenge with growlers is that they're big enough that they don't fit in the same machine to be washed. But we absolutely encourage our producers to use growlers. It's been really successful. We have a whole chain here. You guys may have it too, called Growler Guys. That's really just a whole growler based beer chain that people really like. I know I'm out of time. There's a bunch of questions in the chat. I'm just going to go through and reply to a bunch of these and give people answers.
Yes, thank you so much, Jules. That was what I was planning to ask you. And now we are at our final amazing presenter, Karen Storry. She's a senior engineer at Metro Vancouver who works on circular economy and waste reduction programs and policies for the largest region district in BC. So I am honored to introduce Karen Storry. Please go ahead.
Thank you. And can you see my screen? Is that working?
Yes, it's working.
Okay, so yes, I'm Karen Storry. I'm a senior engineer with Metro Vancouver's Zero Waste Implementation Team. So I'm up in Canada. We're very similar to King County in terms of what we do as a regional district. So we're kind of like King County, and then Vancouver would kind of be like our Seattle. And so I thought I would start out before I get into the one project, which is around what we do at our facilities, on a bit of a highlight of the reuse projects and how long we've been at this kind of trying to do reuse in our region. And I think it provides a bit of context for the reuse story I'll share. And so I joined the Zero Waste Implementation Team just over 10 years ago. So that's kind of where my timeline starts. And you can see that similar to the other presenters that we're here today, we tackled reuse. First of all, the one I'm going to talk about at our facilities, how can we make it so people can drop things off for reuse? Also, we have our behavior change campaigns. So one of our first ones that targeted things for reuse was our Love Food, Hate Waste campaign, which started in our region and then in 2018 went Canada-wide. And that's because we know when we put in our organics disposal ban in 2015, we didn't want people to think like, oh, just because you have a green bin to recycle your food scraps doesn't mean that you shouldn't prioritize reducing waste. We also do a ton of research. So there's lots of textiles presentations today, and we did a ton of research on how that system actually works when you drop the clothing off in your bin and a bunch of other stuff, like can you actually recycle it? And in 2017, in our annual reports, we actually started trying to estimate reuse. I will say a lot of work needs to be done around estimating reuse as it's a challenging area, but I think by having it in our annual report, it's keeping us accountable to continuous improvement. And it's therefore a very important part of our reuse kind of work, portfolio of work. And yeah, we have a couple more campaigns, and this is not even an exhaustive list of everything that we talk about, but I want to show you kind of the two key things with this timeline. One, these programs can take a while to get implemented, and they require buy-in from your organization and from executive level buy-in. And so I'm really happy to work for Metro Vancouver in an organization where they've really helped me prioritize reuse over recycling, despite all the barriers we heard today, because we know that reuse done right has much lower environmental impacts and lots of local benefits like affordability and social good. So we're doing a lot of things for those reasons, even though it's kind of hard. And so I'll talk to you first about our reuse days. And I'm going to go all the way back to 2014 because we did some interesting things back in 2014 trying to figure it out that explains where we are today. And we kind of looked at two different things back then. One was a reuse trailer. And the way this works is similar to the facilities in your area where you go and drop off waste. People go over the scale. And then after the scale, there was this trailer, sorry about the photo, but there was this trailer from Salvation Army. And if folks identified as having something that might be of value, they could stick it in the trailer, and later Salvation Army would come and look through and see if anything was of value. And in this case, the idea was, well, if they drop off something that doesn't actually have value, because as we know with this, value is in the eye of the beholder, then it doesn't matter because they've already paid for it as garbage. And so that's not a challenge. And as you can see by the photo of inside the trailer, like probably not all those things, like eyeing up the couch didn't have value. So that would have probably cost, according to our disposal cost estimator, about $27 for that person to dispose of. And it was a lot of double handling for the Salvation Army folks to kind of sort through and find stuff, and they weren't finding things of a lot of value. So we thought, okay, well, let's just have the reuse people on site and do one-day events. And the one-day events were great, except for they were a little too great. And so we had lineups out the door with all our advertising that we did. So we thought, okay, well, that's not working either. So we didn't advertise. We just kind of did a pop-up event in 2019 on a weekend. And it was quite successful. We filled up a truck in 4 hours. The truck filled up, it was like quite a large truck with no advertising. And I was just astonished at what people were bringing. My favorite story is it was around Father's Day, and there was a barbecue that came in. The guy told us it was broken, and all that was wrong with the electric wire that does the spark start had fallen out of the screw, so it just needed to be screwed back in. So, you know, it's really a matter of people don't understand what has value. And so I'm going to try to explain. We took a bit of a pause, but then we came back strong. And I'm going to try to share. Is the video sharing?
Not yet.
Okay, I'm gonna have to maybe stop share and then
We can see the screen. We can see the screen.
Yeah, it's on the video screen now.
Yeah.
oh, it's on the video screen.
Yeah.
No,
It's just
a
not
moment ago it
started.
was. Yeah.
Okay, so I thought I'd practice being smooth, but I messed up there. But here it goes. This is explaining. So you can kind of see how it works, what happens in 2022.
At a special event at the North Shore Recycling and Waste Center, some items that would normally be entering the waste and recycling stream are being intercepted and reused.
Today we're piloting a program called Reuse Days, where we've hired a local nonprofit organization to help collect and divert reusable materials.
That's great. Yeah, park up by the other one there.
Items are assessed for viability and suitability for reuse, and then the local nonprofit Urban Repurpose sells or donates them.
We collected a large amount of metal, lumber, books, music, electronics, and sometimes clothing. A lot of people that are throwing stuff away, a lot of times it's just because it's the easiest thing to do. It's also that people just don't understand things can be reused, or that there's potential for those items beyond their intended use.
Reduction and reuse are the most effective ways to reduce waste. Wise purchasing decisions and reusing goods where possible means less waste going to landfill and less greenhouse gas emissions caused by manufacturing new products.
Metro Vancouver is really focused on reducing the amount of waste that requires disposal, and we have something called the Integrated Solid Waste and Resource Management Plan, a solid waste management plan that we're actually right in the process of updating.
This event diverted 1,400 kilograms of materials for reuse and is the type of program that will help Metro Vancouver continue to be a leader in waste reduction in North America.
Okay, so that's what we did in 2022, and we're pretty excited. And for those that are trying to do something similar, you can see that the estimate is 300 to 500 kilograms per hour. So what we learned is, especially if the person you work with collects a whole bunch of different materials, folks are coming with the intention of recycling and disposing of a bunch of materials, even without advertising, that could have been reused. And so where we're at now is we are continuing to work with Urban Repurpose at our North Shore facility. And we're going to try to scale up to, instead of just 3 events like we did in 2022, to do every last 2 Saturdays of the month. So we're hoping if we do it more consistently, maybe we can start advertising without having lineups, but still make it manageable for our reuse partner to attend and make sure they're getting valuable items. Because if they're off-site, then who knows what people are putting in the reuse shed. And we're continuing to look at more organizations that we can work with to expand to more facilities. So our goal ultimately is to scale this up, but working with folks that work in the reuse industry, they have challenges like warehouse space. We did find Urban Repurpose a small C-can, so at least on the one day he does per weekend, he can scale it up. And that one day per weekend is important to him too, just because he's kind of a small entity. So after he fills up the truck, it's a pretty long day because he has to go home, unfill it, and come back the next day for Sunday. So instead, we're just doing one day a week. So that's where we're at with our reuse days. It's been several years in the making, working with our operations team, convincing them it's a good idea. And if I'm okay for time, I was going to give a quick sneak peek on our reusable cup and container program, kind of similar to the city of Seattle, but maybe a bit more small scale that we're working on.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, so this is a photo from an East of Seymour, if you're Googling East of Seymour pilot project that was done on the North Shore community in our region. And they worked with a bunch of different businesses. And when I say they, I mean our now partner that we contract with, Ocean Ambassadors, to try to get them to come on board. And what they found is they're really successful when they made a big push, but because the reusable container and cup sharing platform habit was new, it kind of regressed after the pilot. So we wanted to do something to kind of revisit that and see how we could keep reusable cups and containers moving forward in our region. And so we started this project, as I mentioned, with Ocean Ambassadors, with the overall goal of raising awareness of the single-use item problem and expand the network of reusable cup and container platforms within our region. So essentially, we want to have reuse as the default for offices and events in our region. And also, we recognize that because of the mix of urban and kind of more suburban in our region, there's some areas that are outside what might be kind of immediately serviceable by the reusable network. And so we'll be looking at opportunities through this program to encourage them to implement reuse options, like even if it's as simple as bring your own cup kind of competitions or something like that. And so with this contract with Ocean Ambassadors. It's 2 years, and it has 2 kind of key things we're working on, which is events and offices. So at the offices, we're going to try to engage 40 to 60 offices in our region, beginning probably in 2023, just an initial discussion. And then hopefully in 2024, so doing a bit more work with their procurement teams or whoever's appropriate, depending on the office situation, to implement reusable cup and container platforms in those kind of office network areas. And we're actually going to try to walk the talk. We're starting first with our own building. That's a photo of the office tower I work in most days. And we're working with our procurement team currently to see how we might implement the reusable cup and container platforms at our cafeteria. And so we're still not sure how it will go, but so far it seems to be going okay. And then once we get that in place, we'll do lunch and learns with our staff, and we'll also survey them as to where they go nearby, because there's a lot of restaurants in the area where we have our office. And so hopefully we can get some of those local restaurants on the program, but it will be anchored within the offices. And then the community side, the community event side, it's more around just educating the public to keep them excited and keep them and trying to get them onboarded onto these reusable cup and container platforms. So they'll be out there at 12 to 16 events, primarily during the summer, and primarily at events where people aren't as necessarily sustainably minded and might not even realize that these options exist. One of the early learnings from this is that nobody really seems to know what these platforms are or how they work. So one of the first things we'll be doing is trying to explain succinctly how a reusable cup and container program works to someone that has never really thought about doing it before. So looking forward to collaborating with some of the folks that I saw on this conference today with how to do that and answering any questions that you might have about our programs.
Thank you so much, Karen. And do we have questions in the room? We are opening the floor to questions. And maybe I can start with one. Do you mind talking a little bit more about the repair part of your reuse program? Does it include any repair part?
Oh, yeah. See, I didn't have room on my slides, but we do have some folks in the region that do repair. And so right now, our strategy is to work with our 20+ member jurisdictions to implement repair cafes in collaboration with them. And so our role as Metro Vancouver is mainly as a funder. We're working on a funding agreement to encourage our members to do repair cafes throughout the region. And so it's kind of early days, and it's a bit of another story of trying to rebuild that segment post-COVID, but we are working on it. And as usual, there's a lot of demand and just not enough repair entities to help us meet that demand.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. Erin, please ask a question.
Yeah, I was curious about the cup reuse, container reuse, and the partnership with Ocean Ambassadors. Is that correct?
Correct, yes.
And is the motivation there to keep plastic out of the oceans, or I just am curious what that partnership looks like and the business model for it, and so forth.
Yeah, good question. So the way that we both have aligned goals is that Metro Vancouver is trying to reduce single use and get to zero waste with respect to cup and container programs or cups and containers. Our members are mostly motivated by the fact that a lot of these end up in streetscapes garbage, and that costs our members a lot of money to collect. And so Ocean Ambassadors is more motivated around the ocean side. And so I think that's kind of where, even though our motivators are a little different, our end goals are the same. And so we actually hired them on as a contractor to do this education, which kind of gives us extra bandwidth to get that reuse message out.